One thing that I think might be useful is for me to say a couple of things about what I am and am not claiming and why, because I think, this whole I've wrestled for a long time about whether I should use the Platonic name at all. And it has benefits, but it also has drawbacks because it makes people think of things that I'm not actually saying. And so I don't know, I haven't decided if I'm going to at some point have to rename all this. But for now, I just wanted to at some point say a couple of things about how I think this interacts with the biology. And so I don't know if you want to do that off the bat, and then you can sort of react, or if you want to talk about your thing first.
I think that's a good approach, because I was trying to think about that too. And I think empirically, experimentally, that's the bottom line. You want a
Right.
conceptual framework that works for you.
Yeah.
And then the philosophy will just sort of come in later and kind of try to clean everything up,
Yeah.
right? That's my
Yeah.
view of it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's no, I think that's very reasonable. So yeah, let me just say a couple of things then about how I think this relates to the biology. So the first thing is that the goal directedness that we have found in various aspects of morphogenesis, and by goal directedness I mean some degree on the cybernetic continuum, so not magic, but some degree of homeostasis, homodynamic, goal seeking, problem solving kinds of things. That by itself, I don't think motivates necessarily any a Platonic view like this. That is not why I'm arguing for this. So I think it's perfectly possible to have a kind of a simpler, more traditional view of it, and still maintain that open loop emergent models are not sufficient for morphogenesis, that there is a reduction of error versus a set point, and that's fine, right? I don't think you need. So that is not why I'm going in this direction. However, uh, when we start looking at systems that have not been around before on Earth, in the sense that they don't have an evolutionary history of selection in that at that scale. I mean, the cells do, of course, but the organisms don't. And we're talking about things like xenobots and anthrobots and chimeras of various kinds. Then one has to ask the question, well, the typical set points. So let's assume morphogenesis has set points, and so does behavior and physiology. They all have set points. The question, typically we think, where do those set points come from? Well, selection, right? For long eons of interaction with the environment, evolution sets those set points. So for systems that have not had that experience, you want to know what option space are those set points drawn from? Where do they, what are the possible options there? So that right away raises the issue of a latent space of some sort, so that we don't simply get surprised when these things show up. We kind of understand where it's coming from. And specifically, and this is going to be important in a minute, it raises the issue of computational cost. And this is important because for typical animals and plants and things like this, we know when the computational cost was made to define that specific set of features. It was made during the eons of the genome bashing against the environment. That's when we paid the computational cost. When we have these new kinds of beings that have very specific properties and specific capabilities that were neither engineered in by us nor selected from a large set to be exactly what they are, then we have to ask, when did we pay that computational cost? And I'll tell you why this is important. That's when the research program really, I think, kicks in. So then, and this is for sure a metaphysical option. I mean, some people would rather be very kind of minimal physicalists, and they say, I don't want any extra spaces. I don't want to think about latent space. These are simply emergent. And when you say, what does that mean? They say, well, these are regularities. These are just things these are just things that are true in our world. Things like, why do some gene regulatory networks have memory properties? But they just do it. This is just something that happens in the physical world. So I can't disprove that. That's a metaphysical position. I can't. There's nothing really I can do about that, except to say that I find it sort of very defeatist and anti-science. I think seeing these things as kind of a random grab bag of surprises versus a structured latent space that we can systematically investigate. I go the latter way, and I can't prove it. That's just a metaphysical position. I think it's more useful.
Well,
Going
can I stop you there for a second?
Sure.
So that's perfectly compatible with philosophy of mathematics. Math is in the physical world. because these patterns are actually just there in the world. They're real. They pre-exist the organism, right? I think that's the most important thing you want, is that these patterns are somehow real, right? And they're existing before the organism comes on the scene, right?
Yeah.
And
So yes, and so let's start with what, just one more thing, and then let's
yeah,
get into this issue of whether it's physical or not physical, or what it is. Well, I'm getting there. So okay, and so the where this, I think the research program is going to kick in, and we can talk about what that is this question of quantifiably, do you get more out than you put in? That is where, and we've done it, it's very hard to do in biology, because in biology the complexity is huge. There's always more mechanisms you haven't found yet. And it's very hard to make any kind of quantitative arguments, because people say, well, you just haven't found it yet. There's more, so there's some kind of mechanism underneath that does it. Well, that's why we've done a lot of this in extremely simple, minimal systems, computational systems, where you can see all the steps and you know exactly what you paid for computationally. And then you can quantify, this is what I paid for, what did I get? And then right, and then sort of, so my research program is not just the biological, where it's pretty hard to quantify this aspect, but also computational. So now, okay, so now the reissue that you raised about whether math is in the physical world. So this is again related to this issue of what do you put in and what do you get out. I am fundamentally very impressed with the following kind of thing. You start with set theory, and you do something like, okay, I have an empty set, and I can add one more to it, and then now we have successors. Okay, you start with set theory, and then before you know it, you discover a very specific value for the number e, for example. It's a specific value. You didn't start with it. You didn't have a choice about it. I realize that you can make different assumptions and find different things, and maybe aliens start somewhere else and find something else. But having set up certain assumptions, you then get handed a whole baggage of truths of number theory, like very specific things, E and Feigenbaum's constant, and all this stuff. That so you get all these things, and I think the issue is, if we say these are part of the physical world, I think they're part of the physical world in the sense that they causally interact with the physical world. I think there's a causal interaction. We have to talk about what causal means. But I don't think we can say that physical facts fix all the facts. Because if you ask a physicist to tell you what experiments they did to get E, or what they would do to change E, right? If you were at the beginning of the Big Bang and you could sort of twist all the constants, you end up, I feel like you end up in the math department. You leave the physics department at that point, and you're in the math department. So we could say it's also part of physics, but I think that's kind of stretching what physicists do. So
okay, so I want to say, and let me see if I can put on this. And I think this is, can I share my screen?
yeah, sure.
Can you see this slide?
Yeah.
So what I want to say is math is like the meta constraint on all the rest of science. So I'm not saying that if you fix, I'm saying that math is actually above the physics. That's how I see math as structuring our universe. That the universe has a mathematical structure. That's the point. Not that it's going to be the same thing as like, oh, the math is just the Schrodinger wave equation or some equation from physics, but it's beyond that, right?
Yeah.
That's see what. Let me ask, just probe your mind about this. What if the Big Bang never happened, right? What if you could imagine like a situation where there was like no existence of any kind that we know, right? Would the math still be the same?
I mean, that's a tricky question, because then there aren't any observers to know it. Naively, I would say, if we put all that aside, I would say yes. I would say that there are. I'm in complete agreement that we only know certain kinds of math because of our physical and biological history. That's fine. Aliens may have a
Yeah.
different, like, I'm okay with all of that. But how I see it is there is an existing latent space of information. Depending on where you start your exploration, certain things are accessible to you and certain things are not, right? If you're an intuitionist versus not, like, some things you can get to, some things you can't, depending on what axioms you make. But the thing that really inspires me is how much more you get. It's what physicists call a free lunch, right? You start with something extremely minimal and you get a specific value of E. It's this exact value. It's not anything else. It's this one. And this to me is very important. And so I don't think we need to say too many, commit to too many things about what this people often say, well, I hate the existence of other realms. We don't have to say much about these other realms except to acknowledge, I think, that these things do not come from what we typically say is the province of physics. Physical facts do not fix all the facts as far as I'm concerned, right? You can have all the physical facts you want, and E and things like that are another set of facts that you have to deal with. And so to whatever extent that, like, I think physicalism, I don't think it's, Cartesian interactionism or anything that breaks physical. I think physicalism was dead and Pythagoras and before that, because already we knew that physical facts don't fix all the facts. So that's the minimal thing. I don't need to say much more about that or about physicalism than that. It's just I don't think it's a closed system. And so then we have this other set of facts. And so now we have to ask ourselves, what else does that latent space hold? Well, it can hold simple patterns, simple data patterns like the value of E and and pi and things like that. But might it also have more complex patterns that are, for example, behavioral policies or algorithms, or can it even do compute? Does it offer you virtual machines? Like, we don't know yet. These are all empirical questions. But I think math already tells you that physicalism is not true in an important way. And that, I think, is much more powerful for all this stuff than I'm not trying to argue for Platonism from the existence of Xenobots. That's really hard. Although I think it's totally compatible with it. But I think really where the kind of really hard evidence is going to come from is very minimal models where we can quantify the amount of effort, computational effort, that we've put in our universe and what we get out, and whether there's a mismatch here.
That makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, I mean, okay, I think there's a couple. Let's get back to the model of how this all works too. But just while we're on philosophy, I mean, there's one way of sort of formulating the Platonism is like just what you said. There are mathematical facts that do not reduce to physical facts. Maybe that's it. And we don't have to say like where numbers are, right? That, or, with something like that. We don't have to get into too much of the ontology of it. We just want to say there are mathematical facts that are not reducible to physical facts, or are not identical to physical facts, or something like that.
I think that's where we have to start. And I don't think we can say where they are, because the whole where thing is sort of, gets us back to space-time or whatever. So we don't have to say where, but I do think we have to do two things. First of all, I think we have to be open to the idea that what we have considered math up until now does not exhaust all the interesting things in that space. So right. So there may, I happen to think that behavior science actually is part of what studies things that are in that space, right? So it's not just math, but I think mathematicians have the best sort of start on it. And the other thing I think we have to say is we don't have to say where they are, but we have to commit to it's either a total random grab bag of things that just shows up, and there's no way to get, there's no systematic order to it, and therefore we don't try to call it a space at all, right? When I call it a space, I don't mean it's a physical space that we can traverse the way we traverse our current reality. I mean that it's a space because the contents in it are related in some way. There's a metric to it. I mean, the mathematicians certainly think there's like they're exploring this, like they jump from one thing to, right? And so we don't have to say where they are, but we do have to decide whether we're going to assume it's just random or whether that space has some kind of structure to it. And I would think that there
Yeah.
has to be some kind of structure to it.
Oh, I agree.
Even though that by itself, I don't know if it's provable. That's a kind of a metaphysical assumption.
So I'm thinking like, in selling this to scientists, right? That's the thing is like
Yeah.
scientists are physicalists, right? And in your work and in the paper that we wrote, the paper, we didn't really commit to vitalism or any other
Yeah.
metaphysical stuff, right? So, going in this direction is fine. I think it just has to be done in a way that can be makes it,
Yeah.
not seem like you're really going far out on a limb here, right? That
Yeah.
you're
Yeah.
that you're still really sticking within the framework
Yeah.
of hard science. Um,
Yeah,
and and
but when we say hard science, what I don't mean is sticking with the frameworks that all scientists are currently in 2025 committed to, right? Hard science just means you have to work on things that are helping your discovery along in some sense. And we could talk about that. But I'm completely okay with couching it in a way that freaks out as few people as possible. There's totally room for
right,
that. And I understand. I can write wild things somewhere and write much more, sort of constrained things here. But I think it's I think it's impossible to really just say, don't worry, guys, we can all be physicalists. And it's not because of anything I've done, it's because of the math. Like I just don't see how anybody who believes in math can be like a strict physicalist. Right? I know people are, but then when I say, well, what about the value of E and things like this? They say, well, it just happens to hold. So that to me is a total cop out, and we don't have to irritate that angle, but I don't know that we can ignore it completely. And also it's this issue that, okay, some people, and then what some people say, the more sophisticated folks say, okay, look, that's true about math, but that's it. Like none of these other things you're interested in, it doesn't have anything to do with it. Only the math, like this, whatever are not the physical facts, it's only the math facts. And I think I again, we don't have to get into that, but to me that assumption, it shouldn't be an axiom. It should be a testable thing. How can you possibly say that math is mathematicians are the only ones that get to explore that space? That just seems totally arbitrary. I mean, I know that's how people have assumed that, but so I don't think these things are unscientific at all. And I get the sort of strategic value of not pushing them too far in this piece, and that's fine. I'm okay with that. I was talking to Elon Barinholtz this morning, and he was asking, he had said, well, this and that, this sounds a bit woo. And I said, I don't know what's more woo than starting with set theory and finding out a very specific value of E that then turns out to explain a whole bunch of stuff in physics. Is there something more woo than that? I don't,
well, or the fact that pi mysteriously appears in so many places
yeah,
in
yeah,
math. It's like, where
yeah,
did pi come from?
yeah,
Right?
yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
no, I get it. Like, all right, okay. So, I think this definitely can be done. And I think in the paper we can talk about, look, we're not, constructivists. We're not formalists about this. We think it really is real. And so it just kind of boils down to, just sort of how you look at it. And um, I think, I think the way of looking at it can be framed and motivated, like we've been talking.
yeah,
I think, I think what really, like, let's get back to the experimental work and the cash value of all this, like, curing cancer or regrowing limbs and
Yeah.
stuff, right? So to me, what's so cool about it is that once you start thinking in a mathematical direction, right? And and more than just the math sort of is a grab bag of stuff that emerges from evolution, right? Like the math is really there as a structure, let's say. Then you can use the tools of mathematics
Mm.
to model what you think would happen under certain conditions when you play around with xenobots and other things like, well,
Yeah.
is this likely to regrow a limb, or what's it likely to do? So that's what really gives you what I see is the power of the math, is that you really have these tools available to you.
Yeah.
And um
Uh,
yeah,
I,
so it,
and so we just yes, and we there's one thing that we have to sort of head off at the pass, right up front, because what often happens with those things is, and I've seen this like again and again, what happens is we do something interesting like that, and then after the fact someone looks at it and says, well, that's got to be compatible with physics and chemistry, so no surprise, nothing to see here. It's if you zoom in far enough down, all you're ever going to see is the chemistry doing what chemistry does. So what can you draw from that? So this is, I think, what's very important about this is that yes, it's never sort of inscrutable magic underneath. It always looks like chemistry if that's how you want to look at it after the thing has been done. It's the fact that these and I love what you did in the paper with what's his name, the Thompsons, the Thompson stuff. Like I
yeah,
think that's really important, right? And the value of it is in the forward looking. It's like, what experiments does
right.
it make you do? It doesn't escape the fact that afterwards somebody can always look back and say, well, just chemistry doing what chemistry does, which is where a lot of people retreat to afterwards. So we just have to know that it's still going to be compatible with the chemistry. It's just, I have an analogy to this is, in the game of life, yeah, the cellular automaton. You can say that you don't believe in gliders and all there is individual pixels that go black and white and that's it, right? You can be like a reductionist about that, but if you don't believe in gliders, you're never going to build a Turing machine made of gliders as communication elements, which people have done, right? So it's
Right.
not that, and you can look at that and say, well, it's still only following the rules of life. Yeah, but the reason you didn't make this and somebody else did is because you didn't have that particular perspective on it, right? So perspectives matter, and that's, we're going to be able to say we can do all this stuff, but we have to be open to the fact that after we do the experiments, some folks are still going to look at it and say, well, it's just chemistry doing what chemistry does. There's no
Yeah,
getting away from that.
but I mean, another thing I think about this too, like, like the whole emergence paradigm, right? That you're up against. And I think I think what we're talking about is that somehow the system is getting information about something from somewhere the information is not coming from the genome.
Yep.
It's not coming from the geometry of the proteins. What it's coming from somewhere else
Yes.
that's
Yes.
ordering the cells in a certain way.
Yeah.
It seems like, in the beginning of the paper, I say, this sort of battle, the holists versus the emergent people, that now we have really experimental evidence, more stronger experimental evidence that the cells that are getting information from somewhere else.
Yeah. And
Um,
that I think is critical, and being able to, I mean, it's harder in biology than it is in some of the simple computational models, but quantifying that, or at least
yeah,
semi-quantitatively saying how much information have you gained, super super critical. And I think there are two issues that we want to talk about, and I'd love your help on some of this in the paper. One is, so imagine, back to this question of like, when were xenobots and anthrobots, when did you pay the computational cost for those things, right? So I say, okay, here's evolution to be a frog or a human, here's all the stuff that happened, but that never happened for those. So some people will say, uh, okay, well, at the same time that you sort of learn to be a frog or a human, the genome also learned to do these things, and it happened along the way at the same time, right? the trouble with that, so what gets me about that, and I don't know, you can tell me if you think I'm wrong, is that it seems to undermine the whole point of evolutionary theory. The whole point of the theory was to draw a tight specificity between the way that a creature is now and the history of environment that got you there. It was supposed to explain you are, green and frog shaped and whatever, and you have the physiology and the behavior because of all of these historical things that happen. Like that's supposed to. And if you say, oh yeah, by the way, and at the same time, you can be this whole other completely different other thing. There's something wrong here, right? It goes back to this issue of there's extra information here that the standard paradigm simply does not capture. And it's not enough to say that while emergently it just happened to happen at the same time. Evolution requires us to do more than that. It requires us to say why this particular thing and why this set of propensities. So I think we have to say something about evolution and uh, why you can't just say that it just happens at the same time. And then the other thing we have to address is the nature of explanation in these things. And this is also thorny. I don't know exactly what to say, but consider if I ask somebody to explain to me the glider in the game of life, one thing they can do is simply take me through the 4 steps, right? There are 4 stages, I think it's 4, and you can just show me each step, here it is, and then but is that an explanation? It looks to me like a simulation. What you've shown me is that, yes, in fact, that's what happens. In this world, that is exactly what happens. You've taken me through the steps. Great. Is that an explanation? So I think we have to sort of agree in advance, or at least in the paper, ask the reader to commit to what do we expect as an explanation? Because saying that something is emergent to me, or even let's say somebody had an amazing simulator and they could simulate frog cells and sort of just roll the tape forward real fast and say, oh yeah, there's going to be xenobot. Like that does not seem like an explanation to me. That just seems like simulation, and then after the fact looking at your simulation say, oh look at that, this is what happened. So I think we have to say something about what do we want that's more than that. What are we asking for of a good theory, that's not just a prediction, a kind of a black box prediction of what's going to happen. And I don't know what that means in the case of a glider. I don't know what it would mean, but I'm pretty sure for the biology it's not just that we can roll the tape faster than reality does it and just sort of look at the output. That doesn't seem like we've understood anything. So I think those 2 issues we got to stick in the paper somewhere, this issue.
So explaining, just clarify a little bit, explaining what the cells are doing, let's say during morphogenesis. We want what an explanation of that looks like.
Well, an explanation for like when would we be satisfied? So I claim that the standard story of selection and even of developmental plasticity and things like that does not explain the very specific features of xenobots. Okay, they have behaviors,
Right.
they have hearing,
Yeah,
they have a few things. I say the standard model doesn't explain it. The question is, what would make us happy? And we could say, okay, now it's good. Now we've explained it. Because simply saying that, well, it's emergent from other things the cells happen to have been doing, I don't think that does the trick. What would a mature model of this actually look like? Right, the ingredients of if we could map out the latent space, we knew what the possibilities were, and we maybe understood why it went one towards one form versus another, something. Just to know a success case if when we reach it. What does that look like? Because I think it's totally not trivial. I think people don't have a good understanding of what it means to explain something in a satisfactory way. And I think we have to unpack that.
I mean, there are different things people could look for in an explanation, right? That's something that allows you to predict things very well and model things very well. And for all you care, it's a black box inside, right? But there are also people sometimes look for understanding. They think that explanation gives you a deeper understanding of things.
And so that's what we need to flesh out, right? That if you buy, so we should say, if you buy into our realistic commitments to the properties of this mathematical plus space, what does understanding look like then? What are we what in, on this model, what does a successful example of understanding look like? And and maybe I think again the Thompson thing is probably quite useful there, I would suspect.
Yeah.
I Yeah, and this is actually part of I've been having conversations with some mathematicians, like Edward Frankel and some other people around, like, what is understanding in math? What does it
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
What in it, once you've reached, so you're in biology, you start asking questions, eventually you end up in the math department over some symmetries or something. And now the question is, okay, so for you guys, what does it mean to have explained something? Because is there a version of like when we do looking sort of deeper in, or is it lateral at that point? And you say, well, all we can say is that, hey, this looks like this is just like this other thing in topology or whatever. Uh, what does that look like? So we may, I'm still looking for more information on that one, because eventually I think that we're going to have to tie into that.
I think so, but I think just claiming that you want understanding by itself is not necessarily something that
Mm-hmm.
you know earns money. I mean, what you're ultimately talking about is I think, an explanation that is applicable, right? It gives you this kind of understanding that we can, predict what these xenobots and other things are going to do, and we can use them and apply them. And that kind of an explanation is much more useful than just like post hoc, after the fact, saying, "Oh well, it was all physics and chemistry,"
Right,
right?
right,
Um,
for
so
sure.
I think we can definitely cash that out.
I think we
We
should.
can, yeah,
Yeah, I think
uh,
I think we should, but I think we need to be careful about prediction alone, because it's
yeah,
like what's happening with some of these AI models, right? Like,
right, right.
in science, sometimes the thing is crackerjack at giving you predictions, and so then some scientists will be like, okay, well, that's all there is making predictions. So here you go, this thing makes predictions, and then other scientists, of course, are not buying into that and saying, well, because it's a black box, you have no idea why it made the prediction, so we haven't learned anything. It's not science, right?
Well, no, we could say more than that. I mean, we could say, look,
Yeah.
it's doing this kind of computation, or however you're going to just end up describing it, right? The bioelectric network is kind of like a little computer inside the cells doing these computations. And yeah, I mean, that would be a deeper explanation to me. That would be the deeper explanation, right, of what's going on, right? We
Yeah, I think that's
Yeah, we
reasonable.
relate it to the it's related to the morpho space and some kind of computation going on in the bioelectric network. And then you get, a planaria head or tail,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. That
Um,
that I think is ideal. Is to be able to say, what does an explanation that involves? It's almost like we're going deeper. Yeah, I mean, again, on the Tomsky thing, it's like we're going when you have a merger of these kinds of non-physical structures and some physical embodiment. What does an explanation look like that spans both worlds, right?
yeah.
What's a satisfying spanner of those two worlds?
So I think that might be, I think that kind of discussion might go like, sort of the latter part of the paper,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
when, like, I envision the latter part of the paper sort of describing the research program, right? What's the research program from all this? And this is where, you start getting into the experimental value of it, and the explanation that really helps us understand what's going on. Um, I think that's what would,
Yeah.
I think that's where the discussion would be.
I think that's fine. I think we can put it there. I think we have to at least kind of nod to it or
Oh
presage it
yeah, yeah, yeah,
early in the paper, because
yeah, yeah,
because traditional readers just really they start to see the experiments and they immediately come up with a different again post hoc, but a different perspective, and it's entirely unclear at that point why you need all this other stuff. So like we need to set up some of the
No, I think in the paper early on,
yeah.
there will be something like, why the move to platonic space,
Yeah.
right? What's this all about? And then some explanation of, why this is why we would go in this direction, the evidence for it, and the research program and what could be done with it, all that. But then, yeah, and so that would come later.
Mhm.
But yeah, I could see certainly setting that up.
Yeah. Yeah, just sort of outline in the introduction, just outline the rest of the paper briefly and say,
Yeah,
here's, we're going to
yeah,
take you through these steps. Yeah.
yeah.
Hmm.
So, am I pretty much correct in thinking that you're also trying to model mathematically the bioelectric network?
Oh yeah, we have a bunch of papers on this. Yeah,
Right.
absolutely.
So that is the way I see it. That is a mathematical space,
Yeah.
and so is the morphospace. That's a mathematical space, and I see it as a project of trying to, associate, align, whatever term. Carl Friston had something he was talking about. His um, showing. There's so that there could be some kind of mapping, if you
Hmm.
will, from
Hmm.
the
Hmm.
morphospace
Yep.
to the biochemical space or whatever.
Yep.
That's the real cash value, because then you can independently study the morphospace to predict should be going on in that other space, and then ultimately what the organism is going to do. Um,
Hmm. Hmm.
and I agree with you totally. So I agree with you totally that these forms could be behavioral too. Um, it could be a lot of things, right? I mean, we have game theory, for example. That's
Yeah.
math, right? Decision theory,
Yeah.
game theory,
Yeah.
all that stuff is behavioral modeling, and I could see how that, could be useful too.
Yeah.
Um, but I think that, as far as I'm thinking of this paper, is to try to narrow the focus
Hmm.
to morphogenesis. And then later in the paper, again, in that later section of the paper, saying, well, this possibly has applications to
Yeah.
a lot of other areas of
Yeah.
biology and things
Yeah.
like that if we start thinking in this direction.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. That's fine. That's fine. We can absolutely do that. Um, in some of our very minimal computational models, and there's only one paper that's out so far, but there's a couple more coming this fall. uh, we basically look for the same kinds of things, but in very simple algorithmic kinds of systems where you can see it's completely transparent. There are no new mechanisms to be found. You can see the steps, right? And it's doing something, whatever it's doing, and also you get these additional behaviors that are nowhere in the algorithm, and these behaviors are not just complexity or unpredictability. That's cheap and easy. It's very simple to do that. What instead we find are things that are recognizable to any behavioral scientist. They're like very simple kinds of proto-cognitive capacities, things like delayed gratification, things like associative conditioning. And these are things that if you were going to write code to implement them, would be a whole bunch of code. It isn't there. There isn't any code for it. And so you can actually quantify to the point where you can think about commercial applications where there are multiple things going on in the same algorithm, where you charge one customer for one set of things, you charge a different customer for this other stuff it's doing, but there's only one set of steps, right? Like that's a commercial application where you're breaking the standard view that you have to pay for every useful thing that it does. You have to pay for it with energy, every bit. Erasing bits cost you money. So that's also part of the research program, is these very minimal things where already the stuff seeps into, you don't have to be a complex cell or a complex tissue to benefit from these remarkable features. They like soak into even the most minimal kinds of things, where they're less impressive, but nevertheless easier to quantify, and you can actually say, well, what did you get for free, or for cheaper anyway. Yeah.
so anything else we need to talk about? I'm trying to think. Oh, let's think about um where ultimately we would want to publish this
Mm.
and the length and everything, because the last paper we had, it got huge, and then
Yeah, yeah,
it
yeah.
had to be divided in half, and then we had all these problems with the references. It was like Chinese water torture with the references.
Yeah,
But
it was something else. Yeah.
yeah, so
Uh,
um
yeah. I mean, there's a couple things. There's a journal. I'll say, what is it called? There's a journal called Life from MDPI, which has no length limits. That's one possibility. Um, there's adaptive behavior, which Tom Froese is the editor of. I don't remember if they have length limits actually. Um, there's biological reviews, which has a length limit of 20,000 words, which is pretty generous. And they also have they're a really good journal. They tend to have more traditional stuff, so I don't know if they would be up for this, but we can certainly try.
yeah.
I mean,
what,
another, yeah.
what about one of the Frontiers journals?
Yep, absolutely. So yeah, so my tame paper in Frontiers was like 30,000 words. Now I had to fight them on it, but eventually they said fine. It did raise the question in my head of why I wrote 30,000 words, had to fight them on the length, had to fight them, the reviewers on the comments, and then had to pay them whatever thousands of dollars to publish. It's like, why? I should have probably just put it in a book or something. But yes, Frontiers, yeah, Frontiers should be doable. Yeah, should be doable. Uh,
All right, well, maybe we don't have to worry too much at this point about the length
well,
and
and we can also, I mean, what I've done many times is write exactly what we want to write, preprint it exactly how we want to preprint it at whatever length it is. And then if the journal asks us to cut, fine, because for anybody who's actually interested, the preprint is up, right? We're going to preprint it anyway.
yeah.
So I'm not terribly worried about it, but yeah, I think those are reasonable. Those are reasonable options.
All right. So how do you want to proceed on this? Do you want me to want me to revise what I've sent you
I think that
based
would be
on our
great.
discussion today?
Yeah, I think
Um,
that would be great. I mean, I am completely tied up through most of December. I've got a couple deadlines that I'm so behind on already. I can't do terribly much in the next few weeks, but so I think it would be great if you did what you could with the stuff that you've already written in light of what we talked about today, and then I'll highlight the places for me to fill in and yeah, and then I'll jump in.
yeah, okay, good. Because there's going to be a section that summarizing your
Yep,
research in the
yep,
general, this
yep.
whole, I think that'll be fairly easy for you to write. Um,
Yeah,
yeah,
that's
and
that's
there's,
that's fine. And all this stuff up front, sort of motivating all this again in explaining why the because okay, so we don't need to necessarily go deep into math and physicalism and all that, but I think it is important to say that we didn't just conjure up this enormous conceptual baggage just because Xenobots, right? Like this is some because I've only started talking about this stuff in the last year, basically. Some people say, well, just from Xenobots, you're bringing in all this other stuff, and I think it's important to realize that no, it's not just Xenobots. It's like this has been cooking for a long time. It's just there hasn't been a way for us to take it empirically into the empirical stuff. But I think some of the mathematics issues actually tell you this is the case long before you get to any of this. And so I just think some of that, and so having some of that in the introduction, right, that we didn't just bring in this like enormous metaphysical baggage just because of a recent result. It's been needed for a long time, and now we
oh
finally.
no, I mean, look, it goes back to the whole issue of the sort of constraints on constraints on development. I mean, sorry, developmental constraints on evolution, right? It's
Yeah.
been going back a long time. These issues. I have another thought about another example and see what you think about it.
Hmm.
What do you think about parallel evolution? Like the eye.
Hmm.
originating in very like the octopus eye being very similar in structure to the mammalian eye, even though they're very different, what far apart.
Yeah.
Do you think that like the mathematics of refraction and reflection and the materials that you have to work with and the mathematics of reflect of your how your lens works and everything, uh, if that's an issue where um I don't know. I've been thinking about that.
I think
'Cause-
that's yeah, I think that's very interesting. And I mean, I know what the traditionalists are going to say about it, as to why there's like convergences and so on. But I think you're onto something here. You know, we in one of our simple computational models, one of the surprising things that we found is this tendency, which again, not anywhere in the algorithm. We didn't put any code in for this, for behavioral for subunits to want to preferentially associate with other subunits that are like them. Okay, this kind of like stick with my own kind of thing. And Chris Fields and I had a paper years ago trying to explain this from the perspective of surprise minimization. Like the least surprising thing around is a copy of you, basically, right? So you want to
Yeah.
it's like a force for multicellularity, that you want to surround yourself with others that are not as surprising as the outside environment. But that kind of a thing, I mean, talk about convergence, like that's super biological and it's all over the place in biology. But it also crops up in this completely non-biological, like totally artificial, synthetic, computational thing. So I would not be surprised to find out that there were patterns in that space, whether morphological patterns or behavioral propensities, right, or policies for doing things that crop up again and again because they are attracted in some functional sense to certain kinds of embodiments in which they can successfully sort of make a difference in the real world, right? So maybe there's something about being an eye, and maybe it's the shape of an eye, or maybe it's the computational processing that these kinds of eyes can do, right? There's some kind of, yeah, I mean, I think you're onto something. I don't know if we can prove a strong result from that yet, but it's definitely, I think.
Well, another example, of course, are wings.
Mm. Oh.
I mean, we do have a lot of different kinds of wings, obviously, but they're bound by aerodynamics. But that's ultimately,
Yeah.
I don't know. It may be that the physics is doing all the explaining in the emergence.
Oh.
Um, but that's still not a bad thing.
Right.
It's pointing
Oh.
anyway.
Yeah.
It may be. I agree that we should talk about a little bit some more motivations besides Xenobots, because we don't want it to just be like, okay, we're building this huge structure because of the Xenobots, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So
There's and
um,
and actually part of it, you said something really interesting at the beginning of that point, is about constraints, right? So lots of people have talked about constraints, but I think what I see is that physics is the domain of things that are constrained by these mathematical patterns. Like, why are there so many kinds of fermions? Well, because there's symmetries of whatever. But biology, I think, are the things that are not just constrained but enabled by them. In other words, I think evolution exploits the hell out of these things as free lunches, right? Like biological systems are amazing at using these patterns and then leveraging them into novel capabilities. And and some people also talk about enablements or whatever, but I really think they tend to kind of get second, like second shrift, as in, well, the physics means you can only do certain things, so of course, like, there's only so many ways to fly in physics, so of course you're going to have these kind of wings or whatever. I think it's much more interesting to think about all the things that evolution gets to do without having to spend the effort to micromanage it, because of these free lunches, right? Because of these things, you make a minimal interface, and immediately you make a voltage gated ion channel, and suddenly you get all these truth tables and their properties and the fact that NAND is special, and you get all this stuff. You didn't have to evolve those truth tables. You get that for free, right? All you made was a voltage gated current conductance,
Right.
right? And so now, like biology, I think it like exploits the hell out of these things.
No,
So
you're right. I mean, in the paper, I don't know if you read that, and I'll talk about it in my PowerPoint in a couple of weeks. I talk about two different ways that math um, explains. One is the sort of traditional constraint way, but the other way is by creating a space of possibilities that can be explored by the organism and evolution over time.
mm,
Um, so if you think about the cicadas, and the prime number of 13 and 17, what math has done there is it's created a potential evolutionary strategy. My that there wouldn't have been if there were no prime numbers, right? The
mm,
strategy is I want to have a life cycle that maximizes my evasion of predators, right? Because and that's what the prime numbers do, right? It's 15. If you have 15, you can have predators that time their life cycles, and they can kill you at years 5, 10, and 15, right? With prime number, it's harder to do that, right? So that's so
yeah, 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 yeah,
basically
yeah,
so what I'm saying is evolution found that, right? Cicadas didn't have, there's no reason why, they could have had other life cycles and probably do. I mean, there's annual cicadas, right?
yep.
But for some reason, these cicadas, well, we're pretty sure we know why. I mean, it's, because of this. But math creates a space of possibilities then that, yeah,
Yeah.
that's the way
Yeah.
I see it.
No, I think that's absolutely right. And if you want to know specifically, but why does 17 and 13 work so well for that purpose? Now you got to go to the math department and talk about the distribution of primes and find out why are they like that versus distributed some other way. Why didn't you have to wait 1,000? Why didn't you have to count to 1,000 to find the first one? Well, that's not a biological question. It's not a physics question. You're not going to get the answer to that in the
Right.
physics department.
Well, there's some biology in there too. I mean, like, it may just be that biologically speaking, I don't know what another high prime number would be, like, I don't know, 73 a prime number. I don't know. But you know, um, biologically, you just can't get away with a really, really long life cycle, right? There's
Sure.
constraints there on
Yep.
the biological side. Um,
Absolutely. Yeah.
but yeah,
But the actual presence, like you can imagine the number line and where the prime, like where the available primes are, and why isn't it nice that we get some nice available primes early on where the biology doesn't have to wait, and it wouldn't, as you point out, it wouldn't wait, right? It can't.
right.
So
Can't wait.
it can't wait. So it's very nice that we get some low order primes, and who can tell you why that is? Well, it's that's only the mathematicians will tell you that.